Internet, it's me. Now tonight's movie was one called Fear Inc. And right off the bat, it is a movie about a film buff. And before I get into everything else, there's one problem with that. See, I'm a film buff. I watch a lot of movies, as these reviews might let you in on. And the problem with having a movie about someone that's seen and constantly references just a bunch of movies is that they're in a movie. They're an actor. There are other actors around them. And so if you go meta like that, you kill the illusion because the other people in the movie exist in the movies that you're referencing. For example, in this one, our lead guy, Joe, he, like I said, huge film buff, especially horror movies, it seems. Like, he references some other classics, but he really seems to love horror. And, you know, he mentions all the big ones, Freddy, Jason, Michael, all of that. He's even dressed up as Freddy Krueger through most of the movie. The problem is, his best friend in the movie is played by Chris Marquette. You probably don't know the name, but you've seen him in a ton of stuff, like Just Friends, or Fanboys, or The Girl Next Door. But he's also done like some drama and serious stuff like Alpha Dogs, and he's done horror, like Freddy vs. Jason. So our main character, Joe, who's obsessed with horror movies, and specifically mentions by name both Freddy and Jason, has definitely seen that movie that his best friend is in. And so that kind of kills things. And then pretty early on in the movie, they encounter a character you see multiple times throughout, who's played by Patrick Renna, who, again, it's a name you might not recognize, but he's definitely famous, and you certainly know him if you've ever said the quote, "You're killing me, Smalls," because he, of course, played that kid in The Sandlot. And also, if you're a horror fan, he was in Gamebox 1.0, which is a surprisingly good horror movie. So it just... That is one downside of stuff like this, is that, like I said, you go too meta and you kill it because actors are actors and therefore exist in some of the things that you're going to reference. However, that being said and out of the way, I love this premise and I think they executed it super well. See, the thing is, and I'm guilty of doing this myself, is the lead here is obsessed with horror movies. And he says, you know, I just want to be scared. I want something to really, like, get to me and, you know, like, have me shaking in my boots and whatever he said. And, you know, he has seen all the horror movies. And then he goes to a haunted house. And while he's there, he's like, oh, the way they usually set these up, someone's going to jump out and scare that group in 3, 2, 1, and then they do. And I know for a fact I wasn't as douchey about it, but I've 100% done that at haunted houses. I love haunted houses, I really do. I enjoy going to them. I know multiple people that own them and work at them, but I've been to a bunch of them, and I've been just around, you know, haunted hayrides and horror movies and all that stuff in general so much that I'm kind of in the same boat as that guy. I'm not only desensitized to it, but I'm so familiar with the tropes and the expectations and the things that you see that I know what to expect. So if I'm in a haunted house, you know, I'm admiring the decorations and the work they put into it, the atmosphere they create, but at no point am I even close to being scared. So I sympathize with the guy in the movie. I totally get where he's coming from, and I imagine that's why they made him the main character, is that they wanted people who, like me in the character, and possibly some of you, you know, you've become desensitized to horror because you've consumed so much of it. That's who they know is the target demo for this movie, so they're making this movie about that person. Totally makes sense. Anyway, the movie goes, this guy, you know, he's not scared of anything. He's seen all the horror movies, he does the haunted houses, whatever, it doesn't scare him anymore. He wants it to, but it doesn't. And so someone, Patrick Renna, approaches him and says, hey, this isn't scary enough for you. Call the number on this card. And basically, he pitches it as a company that does custom scares. And I know these companies do exist in real life, and I think there are similar services to this that you can order. And honestly, I'd probably be down to try one. That would actually be a lot of fun. But they're probably as expensive in real life as they allude to them being in the movie. But anyway, you know, there's this service, and he calls, and he thinks he's going to do it, but then they say, hey, you know, we're sold out, or we're booked, or whatever, so sorry about your luck. and then it turns out he did actually get to do the service, or maybe he didn't. He doesn't know. But either way, different tropes or experiences from these horror movies keep happening all of a sudden around him. You know, people die in ways that are direct, one for one representations of a famous death in a horror movie. He even calls a couple of them out. The first time his neighbor gets killed, he's like, oh, that's what's her name from Scream or whatever. And just, he recognizes the movies that these are from because, again, he's a horror buff and this was customized to him. So I love the idea that not only is he a horror fan, but the antagonists, or the villains, whatever you want to call them, they are using that against him. They're playing it up and concealing their activities and their kills or whatever as these tropey kills from these horror movies because he thinks it's a game and he's going along with it. And I love that as a premise. I think that's really fun. I think if you're going to go meta with a movie, that's the way to do it because it's a delight. In real life, if you were to kidnap and kill someone, that would be the best way to get away with it, is to, disguise it as a service that they paid for and an homage to these horror movies that they're familiar with and expecting. Basically, they're asking you to kill them at that point. So it's a really good premise and approach, and I really appreciate the way they did it. I don't know what else to say. I've already covered a bunch of the movie. Basically, in the end, he does die because it is a horror movie. And even at the very end, once he thinks it's done, and then all of a sudden he hears familiar music that he doesn't quite recognize right away, and then everyone's just brutally murdered all of a sudden, and the antagonists tell him, oh, hey, we couldn't let you go without having you experience, your favorite death scene. And it's the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones. Everybody dies. And it just, I don't know. It's a lot of fun. I really like the way they do everything. Now, this is a budget film, despite having a couple actors that are familiar to you. Neither of them are major A-listers. I say this as though I'm not very envious of their success and fame. I would kill to be in either of their positions, or even just in a movie with them. But, they're not Ryan Reynolds or Ryan Gosling or anyone else named Ryan. They're just two guys whose names you're not familiar with, but have been in a few movies that you would recognize if they were in front of you. And I'm sure that costs some money, but this is probably still in the indie or low budget frame. That being said, everything looks good. The prosthetics and the blood and everything, when you have the kills or whatever, look great. All the references they make, I don't think you have to pay for a lot of that. I think just referencing something that's so common that it's, everybody knows what it is. It's like how some movies can mention Superman. Even though it's a DC property, you don't have to pay them to mention Superman because everyone knows what Superman is. It's part of common dialect. It's part of just, the cultural zeitgeist that we all share. So you're not really infringing on a trademark because you're not changing the perception of it or using them to advertise your product or anything. You're just acknowledging that a thing exists in the world, which it very clearly does. So I think, mentioning Freddy Krueger or even dressing up like him to go to a Halloween party is fine because it's just a real world normal thing that many people do and just recognize as part of their everyday life. So they probably didn't spend much money there. Like I said, the effects look great, so they definitely had to have a good artist just to do the prosthetics and the blood work and all of that. Their lighting and sound teams were on point. Everything looked really good. Everything sounded really good. None of the scenes looked really hokey. Most of it took place... Oh, excuse me again. Most of it took place in one house. So the set budget was probably low. At one point they go out to a desert and they go to a really small diner. But minimal, set locations that they had to dress and everything. It looks like a budget film, but not necessarily an indie film. But that doesn't mean it's bad. In fact, I think it's great for what they did for what they had. And again, I'm making assumptions here. Maybe they had a ton of money. Maybe I'm way off base. But either way, the movie looks good, is my point. At no point are you going to say, oh, this is really janky. No, it looks professional. It looks really good. All the references they fit the character. That's the other thing I think is important, is that when you have a meta thing like this and you're making all these references, you can't make a reference just to make a reference, because then it comes just heavy-handed and forced, and you're just like winking at the audience, but it's not as subtle as a wink anymore. Now going, you see that movie? We did the thing. You get it? Yeah, the movie that we referenced. You've seen that movie. Like, you can't do that. You can't be so obvious, or else it's not fun anymore. But here, the character is making these references because that's his character, because he's a cinephile. He loves movies. And they show him to be, a bit of a loser, just kind of a stoner, does like party drugs, gets drunk with his friends, doesn't have a job, doesn't really want to get a job. Like, he clearly just sits around and watches movies. Like, that's his personality. We've all met or know people like that. Some of you might be people like that, which don't be. That's not a person people like. Don't be that person. But those people exist, and we can all acknowledge that. So when you see him in the movie making these references, it doesn't feel out of place or unnatural. It feels like a person we've all seen. So when he does this, you're like, oh, yeah, no, I know a guy that does that. He talks only in movie quotes. He's done that Bane imitation to death over and over and over again because he saw a movie once and it's quotable. So, like, it all made sense and it fits the character, and I like that. They found a way to be meta without being heavy-handed, and it just goes to show that, like, I've praised the effects and everything else, but honestly, the writing team was really on point here, too. They really found a way to tie in these references and to be this meta and to do all this stuff without it feeling forced. Like, it felt natural for the character. Everything that happened felt like a good progression. Him acknowledging the movie aspects of the kills happening around him, but then still kind of getting freaked out when they get a little too real. Like, that was a great arc. His breakdown at the end. Let me talk about that. The writing was great, was my point. His breakdown at the end, I fucking love. They lingered on him for so long. Like, if you go and watch this movie, and you absolutely should, at the end, when he has his breakdown, when he really loses it, the camera just lingers on this guy for so long. He's scared, and then he's depressed, and then he's kind of accepted that everything happens, and he's just in the deep despair, and he's trying to free himself from the hood, and then the tape on his mouth, and then the tape on his hands, and it's one shot the whole time. It doesn't zoom in or out. It doesn't move, nothing. It just lingers on him as he processes all of these emotions and go through multiple stages of grief, all in one take, in one shot, on camera. It is incredible. The fact that he could do that, he's just an exemplary actor. But also, the decision to write that in and to have that be one shot was just incredible. Like, whoever's idea was, it's like, hey, you know what would make this have the most impact? Show the whole thing. Don't show him being sad and then being upset and then acceptance, whatever. Like, show him going through all those stages in succession in one shot and just linger for like 2 minutes and let him process everything. And it comes out so good. Honestly, if you're a film buff and you just like to see good acting, or just like if you want ideas of how to play a role, if you're an aspiring actor yourself, watch this movie just for that scene, if nothing else. Like, seriously, he does an incredible job. So yeah, definitely props for that, for the actor, the writers, director, everyone involved with that scene. A+, completely killed it. Yeah, overall, if it wasn't clear, I am a big fan of this movie. Like I said, when you recognize famous actors in a movie about someone that loves movies, it's a bit silly because clearly they would also recognize them. But other than that, I have no complaints. I think the movie is great. I think it's well done. I think everything about it is excellent. I highly recommend it. Again, it's Fear Inc. Did I actually say the name of the movie? I'm not even sure. But yeah, Fear Inc. 2016, not the 80s action movie, or actually I think it was mid-90s that came out, but not that one. It's 2016, it's the horror movie one. Definitely watch it. It's a lot of fun. It's just an absolute blast, and really a love letter to horror fans, because it's all about a horror fan. So yeah, highly recommend it, and that's all I have to say. So stick around, tomorrow's another video, and I'll see you then.